we see Hikaru throw his hands in the air. He's like, what is happening?
That anger has really driven him.
So Hikaru not happy, as we can see. So more on that towards the end of this video. But first we need to see how he channeled that anger into this Armageddon game. Because after 4 games, him and Wesley So could not be split in the Airthings Masters semi-final. That took us to an Armageddon, and because Hikaru won the bidding process, he then played with the black pieces which he got to choose, and he therefore had the draw odds, meaning that if the game was a draw, he would progress to the final where he'd meet Magnus Carlsen. So let's see what happened here. We had e4 from Wesley, Hikaru goes e5, both of these knights develop, and now here we see bishop to b5, the Roy Lopez. Why is that intriguing? Well, more on that in a moment. Now we had knight f6, the Berlin defense, Hikaru's favorite, rock solid. And after d3, which is what Wesley chose, there are many variations. This one defends the pawn. Well, Hikaru then brings this bishop out. Now he does allow white to capture here, which is what Wesley plays, giving up the bishop pair as white, but shattering the pawn structure in compensation. And it looks like you're losing a pawn, but you can't do this because of queen d4. Hits the knight, also threatens checkmate, no good. So instead, the king castles. Now the pawn really is a target, so the queen defends. And now knight bd2 carries on the development and looks to hop to that powerful square I'm highlighting where it would hit both of these. So the bishop covers. Now we see b3, and sometimes the bishop now hits that diagonal, further targets the pawn. But first we had these couple of moves inserted, and now knight d7 from Hikaru. So he preempts the attack on this pawn, also makes way for the f-pawn, and that's why the knight now jumps immediately while it still has the chance. Hikaru goes f6 anyway, and here white picks up the bishop pair back. And now I don't love the next move for Wesley. So he throws in this check, Hikaru covers, and then he drops back with the queen. Now it makes sense to keep the queens on the board, but what has he really achieved through this? Because now when Hikaru re-maneuvers this knight, we get knight c4, and it hits e6 here, a square it couldn't have hit if the queen was still sitting there. So it feels like the queen check helped black more than it helped white. Now king h1, aggressive ideas to move that f-pawn, and now this is where Hikaru really takes some initiative. Who's the one really playing for a win here? He goes pawn h5, kicks the queen, and then goes g5. Now it looks really weakening to move these pawns when your king's still stuck in the centre, but there's a positional idea to it, because now it's really hard for white to break with anything on the king side, and so this is why Wesley now turns the attention to the centre of the board. So Hikaru goes b6, and now c3 from Wesley reveals his idea, and because b4 is a possible break as I'm highlighting there, we don't see Hikaru castling queenside. Instead he brings the rook across, the queen sidesteps, pawn h4 kicks on, gaining the space, and after the rook centralizes, now Hikaru goes this way, and this is where Wesley strikes in the center after this exchange with pawn to d4. He has to get some counterplay. So Hikaru captures, the pawn takes back, and after the knight retreats, Wesley just goes slightly wrong here. So the best move is pawn to d5, because after captures, which is best, pawn recaptures, whether the knight comes here, whether the knight comes here or here, then the best move is pawn to d6. And the idea is you're starting to rip open these pawns, undermine b6 as well. But having said that, black does have play. You know, these two are converging on the b3 pawn. So it's not to say this is winning by any means, but it seems to have been the best try. But Wesley goes queen to c3, covering the d pawn, but now Hikaru gets this excellent break of pawn to c5. Now we don't see the pawn kick on, which was technically the best move, but then the knight can now hit d4, supported by the pawn. It's a new move, not available in the old variation. And so this is where we see captures on c5 from Wesley. But this is a different kind of poison, because after the knight recaptures, look at that rock solid outpost supported by this pawn here, and Hikaru's taking the initiative. So f3 defends that e pawn. Now pawn h3 starts ripping open the king, and it's a difficult decision for white. If you take, you're ripping open the king position, so Wesley pushes on, but now there's always going to be checkmating threats using that thorn pawn. Queen e6 played, just starts to look down here. g4 could be on the cards, or f5. So the king comes off that long light squared diagonal, and now f5 from Hikaru just rips things open, because after pawn captures, he doesn't even recapture. He plays the star move of queen to e2, threatening mate in 1, and it's really annoying to deal with. You can't come like this because you drop a rook down here, you're about to get mated. You can't come with this rook to defend because then we capture, queen takes back, and the problem here is that the queens are falling off the board. I mean, this is technically playable, but how drawish does this look when you need to play for a win? And so that's why Wesley doesn't move either of the rooks. He goes knight to e3, covers the mate like this, and now this is really nice from Hikaru. Rook d to e8, stepping away from that open d file and targeting this knight. And white can't play the move that they want to play, which is sliding a rook across, x-ray defending the knight, and kicking the queen out of your house, because there's a deadly tactic here. Can you spot the move that black can play here? So the move you can play to win on the spot is rook takes on e3, because if the rook takes the queen, well then you take here and you're a whole knight up, and if instead you take the rook, well then this is the trick, you checkmate the white king because you've now removed the defender. So this is a problem. That's why Wesley plays the only move in the position to save this knight, which is queen c4 check. Forces off these queens, but now how difficult is this to win the game? Hikaru takes here, g4 kicks the rook. It drops back to f7, with the idea being that after Wesley targets the pawn, Hikaru can slide like this, and although he gets hit with this nice tactic which Wesley finds, the idea being if takes then takes here and white's doing quite well, well actually you can just ignore that knight on a5, because the moment it moves anywhere it leaves the defense of this pawn and black takes here. So Hikaru just activates. Again, look at the power of this pawn. Now knight c6, Wesley really had very few moves. So Hikaru captures here, and now a5, as good as a draw offer. Now Hikaru captures, he also had knight d2 targeting this pawn and rook, which was very strong. But he captures, and now Wesley probably realised that danger, goes rook f2, and here we see the moves repeated. You just cannot live with that rook on the second rank, the knight coming to d2, Wesley had no better, the game was drawn. So why was Hikaru so angry? Well, the clocks got started, but with increment, and there shouldn't have been increment. Hikaru was supposed to have 9 minutes 28 seconds, no increment, and 15 minutes for Wesley. The game had to be restarted, and if we run it back here, well, in the first game, the bishop came to c4. Italian game, different game. Then Wesley deviated, so Hikaru was angry about that. He'd been able to show Wesley what he was going to play. Now, he still won, but it could have made a difference. Anyway, online chess. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you want to see an exceptional game played by Magnus Carlsen, then check out the video on screen. Thanks very much for watching, and see you soon.